The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
In the wake of the horrific attacks in Paris over the weekend, there's been more and more discussion of guns, gun control, and gun safety regulation. And there's now a new report from the Government Accountability Office, which says that over 2,000 known and suspected terrorists in the United States have legally purchased firearms between 2004 and 2014, according to the Washington Post. As they say, and we'll take a look at a quote from the Washington Post, membership in a terrorist organization does not prohibit a person from possessing firearms or explosives under current federal law. The Government Accountability Office concluded in 2010. The law prohibits felons, fugitives, drug addicts, and domestic abusers from purchasing a firearm in the United States, but people on the FBI's Consolidated Terror Watch List, typically placed there when there is reasonable suspicion that they are a known or suspected terrorist, can freely purchase handguns or assault-style rifles. Okay, but how many attempts were made by individuals on this list? Well, at least 2,233 attempts were made by suspected terrorists to purchase firearms over that 10-year period. And those attempts, Lewis, were successful 91% of the time. Not very effective, is it?
That's pretty incredible. No, not effective, Dave. I don't like hearing that. It's not really surprising, though, is it?
No, it's not. And even these numbers are incomplete because of a programming error that the FBI subsequently fixed, according to the GAO. So there was a bipartisan bill offered this year. It was unsubtly described as Denying Firearms and Explosives to Dangerous Terrorists Act of 2015. It would prevent several hundred gun purchases every year by suspected terrorists, and it includes provisions to let people challenge a denial. So if you're worried about, oh, the hammer of the government fist is coming down on me and I'm not a terrorist, well, it has a provision to challenge that. The NRA doesn't like it. Let's take a look at a quote from the NRA. The NRA objected to earlier versions of the bill, saying they were aimed primarily at law-abiding citizens, law-abiding American gun owners, that prohibiting the possession of firearms doesn't stop criminals from illegally acquiring them, and that the bills were, quote, sponsored by gun control extremists. Because an armed society, something, freedom and liberty, right? I mean, that's really the reason why we see groups like the NRA oppose this type of legislation.
Well, you have people in the NRA and people who support the NRA who think it is a freedom issue, but the NRA is just trying to sell more guns because that's the goal here. It's business. It's money. Like everything, it's money.
And it's interesting because we don't allow felons from owning. We don't allow felons to own guns, but we allow people suspected of terrorism links to be purchasing guns. And you have to remember, and I understand, if you're suspected of terrorism, that doesn't necessarily mean you're a terrorist. I mean, at one point, former Senator, the late, great Ted Kennedy, was on one of these no-fly lists accidentally, so errors are made. But there is this total incongruency that exists, and the pro-gun groups like the NRA are just totally unhinged about it. Over 2,000 terrorists able to suspected terrorists, legally purchase guns over a 10-year period. Donald Trump has been reacting to the attacks in Paris. He is saying that we should consider closing down mosques, but he wouldn't consider it, but others would, and he would, but he would never do that. Lewis, I can't understand what Donald Trump is saying, but we have the interview of Donald Trump. This is after the horrible attacks that killed 129 people at last check in Paris. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump said, well, we have to strongly consider shutting down some of the country's mosques. He was on MSNBC's Morning Joe. But at the same time, he said he wouldn't do that, that people are thinking about it, but he wouldn't, but we have to strongly consider it. See if you can understand what he said. Let's take a look.
You did a lot of reporting this weekend. I think I picked up this weekend that actually the French have said they will shut down mosques that breed hatred.
That have radical leadership. So they're very specifically talking about ones that they can determine have very specific ties.
They will
to radical,
go in and shut down mosques that have radical
There's talk about that in many places.
Donald Trump, the French are talking about that. Is that something that you would consider doing as president?
Well, I would hate to do it, but it's something that you're going to have to strongly consider, because some of the ideas and some of the hatred, the absolute hatred, is coming from these areas. And, in New York City, as an example, we had a group of people, from what I understand, that really knew what they were doing, that were really studying the situation, and they're not doing that anymore. And under the new mayor, they're not doing that anymore. And I think that's a mistake. So it's something that many people, not me, it's something that many people are considering, and many people are going to.
Yeah. So we have to strongly consider it, and many people are, but not him. But we must strongly consider it. I guess what he means is whoever is ultimately president should consider it, which very clearly is not going to be him. Is that possibly what he was referring to?
He doesn't want to say it, right? He likes to just kind of, beat around the bush here.
Really smart people are considering it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what he thinks he's going to get. I don't think if his campaign is saying, listen, we need to be careful about the Muslim vote in this country for you. I don't think he's got it anyway, so he can just say it.
I'll have to remember this consideration that we must strongly consider whenever there's a Christian terrorist. Is there ever a discussion of we have to strongly consider shutting down churches, Christian churches, and remember, here in the U.S., domestic terrorist acts are almost always conducted by someone who is certainly non-Muslim and typically a Christian to some extent. They may not be the strongest adherents to Christianity, but certainly Christians, at least on paper. Now, this is not to say that Islam is no problem or that Islam is the only problem or whatever. The reality is nuanced, Lewis, and a lot of people have been going fully to one side or the other on this issue since this attack in Paris. The correct reaction is not the right-wing reaction, which is Muslims are the problem, period, shut down mosques, ban Muslim refugees, right? That's crazy. On the other hand, the reaction from some has been, we can't critique Islam at all because these are not real Muslims and Islam has nothing to do with this. I disagree with Sam Harris on many things, but I think Sam Harris is absolutely right when he has written that the circumstances today, right, today in 2015, are that too large a portion of all of those who consider themselves Muslim harbor some level of radical beliefs, right? There is a group of Muslims that would commit violent acts based on their religion if given the opportunity. And then there's a bigger group, if we think of it as sort of concentric circles, there is a bigger group that says, well, when surveyed, Muslims who say, I wouldn't go out there and commit violent acts, but I think that the violent acts are okay to be committed, and I think that those on the receiving end of the violent acts do deserve to be victimized by those violent acts. That's the reality right now, that a too large a portion has those beliefs, and we have many polls that show that. Now, this is not a ranking of Islam as a particularly bad religion. It's not saying Christianity is better or worse. And as Sam Harris has written, there was a time hundreds of years ago, Lewis, where the problem with too much radicalism in religion was a Christian problem, and that's been written about. All we have to take into consideration, and this is not about being Islamophobic, this is not about being racist, this is not about saying that any particular group of people are bad people. Right now in 2015, we have a percentage of those who identify as Muslim that are falling into what they see as maybe a literal interpretation of some teachings. And those are the only people that are being discussed when we talk about the issue with radical Islam. I don't think, Lewis, that banning the term radical Islam is something that makes sense. I think that is the word police coming in. Radical Islam exists. Radical Christianity exists. These forces exist to differing degrees over time. And right now, this is just something that we're talking about, and we should be allowed to talk about it.
Yeah, so we should be allowed to talk about whatever we want. That's America, David, freedom of speech. What's your definition of radical? When in a Muslim country, women are not allowed to show any part of their body except their eyes in public, to me, that's radical.
But that's a radical belief on behalf of the government. And you're saying those who agree with that share in those radical beliefs.
Yes, that's true.
Where you draw the line at radical is definitely up for interpretation. And we could talk about this in Christianity, right? This is not exclusive to Islam. We could say in Christianity, if you're against abortion, is that radical? Well, no, probably not. If you believe that Planned Parenthood clinics should be protested, is that radical? I don't know. If you believe that Planned Parenthood clinics should be attacked, is that radical? We can draw the line in different places when we're talking about different issues, and I think that that's perfectly okay to do.
No doubt. Yeah, everyone's got a different metric for that.
Let's talk about Republican presidential candidate Ben Carson. A lot has been made about Ben Carson, the great pediatric neurosurgeon, running on his skills and prestige from being a fantastic neurosurgeon. This has been mostly unquestioned. And one of our viewers, Alan, wrote to me and said, hey, David, I looked into this issue of whether Ben Carson is this great neurosurgeon. It appears he may be a mediocre at best neurosurgeon. Alan said, I did a little reading on Carson's supposed miraculous separating of twins, conjoined twins, Patrick and Benjamin Binder. It turns out that Ben Carson was part of a 70-member surgical team for the process. So Carson was 1/70th of that team. And further, the twins survived the surgery, but they were never able to live reasonably normal lives. To this day, Patrick Binder remains in a vegetative state. So Ben Carson had most likely a minor role in the separation, and it wasn't a miraculous success the way he pretends it was. Let's put aside for a second the conjoined twins situation. Ben Carson has a long history of malpractice suits where his patients suffered serious debilitation at the hands of Ben Carson. Now, records indicate Ben Carson has been sued for malpractice at minimum 6 times, dating back to 1986. Okay, long surgical career, 6 times, maybe it's not that much. And plus, just because you're sued for malpractice doesn't mean you did anything wrong, but we unfortunately can't make that claim, Lewis, because several of the legal cases against Ben Carson are still pending. Carly Bailey, who's 27, sued him in 2009, claiming that Ben Carson performed a botched surgery to remove a tumor from her brain when she was 9 years old. The operation left her with a right side facial droop, vertigo-like symptoms, and other complications. And this is just horrific. In 2011, Darlene King, a 69-year-old woman, filed a lawsuit claiming that Ben Carson perforated her eardrums and left a sponge in her skull, which he later allegedly mistook for a tumor. This is out of a Seinfeld episode, if true.
This is pretty crazy. But when it comes to the splitting of the twins,
yeah,
these surgeries take place over a very long time.
Right.
You have many people coming and going, and you do have a few people kind of overseeing things who are generally in charge of what's happening. So I don't think that is an example of Ben Carson perhaps being incompetent. However, everything else you just listed, I think it's kind of scary, Dave.
Question 1, does being a pediatric neurosurgeon qualify you to be president? I think the answer is clearly no, particularly since it doesn't prevent Ben Carson from having all sorts of insane ideas about science. So being a pediatric neurosurgeon does not qualify you to be president. Question 2 is whether we agree that Ben Carson was a fantastic neurosurgeon, and that's increasingly unclear.
The answer is unclear. I'm not going to say no, but it's unclear. Dave, if you asked me if I thought that someone who thinks that the pyramids were used to store grain would be a great pediatric neurosurgeon, I would say that's impossible.
All right. And we will have to continue exploring that. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at Lewis Motamedi. We will take a break and be back with plenty more.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show is made possible by our audience through something called membership. Lewis, you have memberships, right?
I have, what is it, about 2.8 million.
Right. And how do you afford those anyway?
The trust fund. Yeah.
Lewis is the top member, but many other David Pakman Show members, a big part of the success of the show, including arriving finally at the new studio in Boston. You can sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. And very exciting news, I finally have the 2016 Patriot Mail calendar right here. It is fantastic. Even just the cover, designed by Anthony Petramala, who put together the calendar, is stunning. You can get your calendar for free with a membership at davidpakman.com/calendar16. Let's talk about the last Democratic primary debate. Very much news was made around this headline that a public policy polling survey of Democratic primary voters shows that Hillary Clinton defeated Bernie Sanders, defeated Martin O'Malley in that Saturday night debate. I read it, Lewis, and it says very clearly 67% of voters think Hillary Clinton won the debate, only 20% for Bernie Sanders, only 7% for Martin O'Malley, 63% of viewers saying that the debate left them with a more positive impression of Hillary Clinton. I said, okay, that's interesting. Let's take a look at the methodology, right, Lewis? Because the methodology is very important in these things. Let's take a look, if I may, at that methodology. PPP interviewed 510 Democratic primary voters nationally by telephone after the debate. Let's stop right there. 510. Okay, it's a slightly small sample size. Typically, we like to see 1,200 to 1,400, which we know increases the confidence and reduces the margin of error in these types of polls. 510, fine. At least they interviewed 510 people. Let's continue. People who had been pre-screened on Thursday and Friday as planning to watch the debate and willing to give their opinions about it afterward. Okay, now it starts to get a little weird. The people have been pre-screened. You can do a lot of stuff when you're pre-screening people that you're going to include in a poll. And then here's the kicker, the methodology ending with the survey's margin of error is 4.3 percentage points. Fine. This research was conducted on behalf of Correct the Record. Correct the Record? Huh. What's Correct the Record? Google it. It's stunning. May 2015. Headline, Correct the Record launches as a new pro-Clinton super PAC. Headline, pro-Clinton super PAC Correct the Record is going negative on Bernie Sanders. The poll was funded by a pro-Hillary Clinton super PAC. Does that guarantee, Lewis, that it's a biased poll? No. But when you look at a poll to determine whether one person won a debate or another person won a debate, and you find out that the group that paid for the poll has been running negative ads about one candidate and is supporting a different candidate, that's what we call a red flag.
Yeah, I'm thinking, imagine what you would be left with if you just took all the polling information, all information about this primary.
Yeah.
And you filtered out everything that came from a source that you thought might be biased or untrustworthy, what would you be left with?
Well, you'd be left with a lot less than what we think we have, but this is really the epitome of it, right? I mean, this is worse than, we can look at how the questions were asked, or we can look at a lot of different things. This is an example where just following the money tells you most of what you need to know about this poll, and it is absolutely disturbing. Now, I want to follow up about something else from the last debate, Lewis, if I may. Hillary Clinton, in the Democratic debate over the weekend, she was criticized, maybe is a better word, for having so many Wall Street donors and the big banksters. And she said at that debate that the reason she had those donors was not because anybody's expecting political favors or because she's friendly to the big banksters. She said it was because she was senator of New York on 9/11, and she was down on Wall Street in the rubble of 9/11, and that as a result, the big banksters, the big companies, the big financial firms were donating to her. This is what Hillary Clinton said in the debate about this. Take a look.
These campaign contributions will not influence me. I'm going to be independent. Well, why do they make millions of dollars of campaign contributions? They expect to get something. Everybody knows that. Once again, I am running a campaign differently than any other candidate. We are relying on small campaign donors, 750,000 of them, $30 a piece. That's who I'm indebted to.
Well, John, wait a minute.
Personal privilege.
He has basically used his answer to
impugn my integrity. Let's be
No,
frank
I've
here.
not.
Oh, wait a minute, Senator. You know, not only do I have hundreds of thousands of donors, most of them small, and I'm very proud that for the first time, a majority of my donors are women, 60%. I represented New York, and I represented New York on 9/11. When we were attacked, where were we attacked? We were attacked in downtown Manhattan, where Wall Street is. I did spend a whole lot of time and effort helping them rebuild. That was good for New York, it was good for the economy, and it was a way to rebuke the terrorists who had attacked our country.
Right. So it didn't really make sense. Lewis was totally disgusted in yesterday's show with this, saying this is totally bogus. Well, people have looked into the timing of this, and it actually turns out that Hillary Clinton was a top recipient of Wall Street donations before the 9/11 attacks. According to the International Business Times' review of federal records, Hillary Clinton was raising big money from the big Wall Street firms before the 9/11 attacks. In 2000, which is before the 9/11-2001 attacks, in her Senate race, Hillary Clinton raked in over $1 million from the securities and investment industry, according to data compiled by the Center for Responsive Politics, a nonpartisan group. This made her the third largest recipient of Wall Street money of any member of Congress or congressional candidate. Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2000 was also supported by the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, which had raised in that year over $4 million from the finance sector. And speaking fees, Bill Clinton was paid $125,000 by Morgan Stanley Dean Witter to speak months before 9/11, and $125,000 by Credit Suisse First Boston in the same month, February of 2001. We can have, Lewis, a robust and meaningful debate about whether this matters, how it matters, whether we believe that these donations do or don't have influence over Hillary Clinton or any other candidate. But to say the reason for the big Wall Street donations was she was there on 9/11, unless time functions in a way that's different than how I understand time to function, is not true.
And she's just throwing red meat out there. It's like the Family Guy where Lois stands on stage when she's running against Peter and she just goes, 9/11, and the crowd goes crazy. A terrorist, and the crowd goes crazy. That's what she's doing, Dave. Am I alone in finding this to be completely obnoxious?
I'm getting a lot of emails from people who say this is obnoxious, but let's now answer the next question, which is, do we have reason to think that the connection financially of Hillary Clinton to the Wall Street banks has influence over her political positions? Well, we know she opposes breaking up the big banks and making them separate their commercial banking activities from the risky speculative activities. Bernie Sanders says he wants a new Glass-Steagall. Hillary Clinton said she does not. Is it because of these campaign contributions? Impossible to say for sure. Hillary Clinton has not said she favors single-payer health care like Bernie Sanders does. She wants to improve the Affordable Care Act. And as we've talked about, the Affordable Care Act is a big boon for the for-profit insurers that are very much connected to the Wall Street banksters. Is it because of the donations she receives from Wall Street? We certainly can't say for sure. And lastly, Hillary Clinton wants a $12 an hour minimum wage. Bernie Sanders wants a $15 an hour minimum wage. Is that because of some of the big corporations that donate to her and have mutual investors with the big banks and would benefit from a lower minimum wage? It's impossible to say for sure, Lewis, but there are certainly some policy questions that are worthy of discussion here.
Yeah, well, we can look at her voting record, Dave, from when she was in the Senate, and I think everyone will agree that tends to lean in a certain direction.
Let's talk about Black Lives Matter. Protesters at Dartmouth University, Black Lives Matter protesters disrupted students who appeared to just be studying in a quiet library. They reportedly were hurling profanity at white students and physically pushing others. Here's just a little bit of the video from this Black Lives Matter protest in a quiet library.
Black Lives Matter! 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 Black Lives Matter!
All right, that gives us a sense of what's going on. So reportedly, some of the protesters were also saying, F you, you filthy white Fs, F you and your comfort, F you, you racist S's. One of the protesters posted online that they were ashamed of what the protest turned into. So even some of those who initially thought this was a good idea, saying that they were very displeased with what this turned into. Lewis, I've made it very clear. I support almost all of the goals of Black Lives Matter. I agree with Black Lives Matter with regard to the problems in society that they have pointed out. But what will they achieve by protesting a quiet library? I don't get it. This will get attention. I don't think it's attention that will catalyze credibility. I don't think it's attention that will catalyze change. Who am I to give advice, though? And every time I talk about this, people email me. They say, David, you're not black. You can't comment on this. Your comments are irrelevant. Fine, then ignore my comments. But these are my comments, and I do not understand what is going on here.
Yeah, well, right. If no one had their cell phone out and recorded it, would there even be, would anyone even know, except the people who did it and the library? It's really not that busy a library, Dave. I mean, there are much better venues for this type of thing.
Of course, and if you believe Black Lives Matter, if you believe in the movement, you have every right to demonstrate. You have every right to protest wherever you want. You have every right to disrupt whoever you want to disrupt, as long as you're not breaking any law or being violent, as some were accused of doing here. I just don't think you're going to achieve much by disrupting students who are studying. What are you going to achieve by doing that? And disrupt something bad that's going on. Go to the chancellor's mansion, or what, I don't know where the chancellor lives at Dartmouth College. At UMass, it was a very, very nice house. Go there and protest what's going on with tuition, and protest what's going on with the disproportionate lack of college degrees among non-whites in the United States. That makes sense. I could get much more behind that. But disrupting a quiet library, I do not understand. I don't think that their interests are well served here. If I'm wrong, just let me know, and I will gladly address how I'm wrong. Let's take a break. After the break, we'll talk to Jen Briney about CISA and two other bills that it is potentially being merged with in the House.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Jen Briney, host of the Congressional Dish podcast, which exposes corporate influence in the bills and laws passed by Congress. And we have a doozy. We talked about this, Jen. I guess it was a couple weeks ago, two and a half weeks ago. CISA. We talked about the bill. We talked about the fact that it had passed the Senate. It has still this process through which it may be merged with two other bills. Let's get to the beginning, which is, what is in CISA?
So CISA is supposed to be for cybersecurity, for protecting critical infrastructure. That's how it's being sold to us. But the truth is, it's actually about letting any private company in the world transfer information to the United States government and get immunity for doing so. And so the way the bill actually works is it says that they're allowed to send us or send the government cyber threat indicators. But the problem is the definition of cyber threat indicators is so broad that it allows information that is threatened to be taken in a cybersecurity attack, and any information stolen to be transferred to the government. And so because it's so broad, it can really allow them to get immunity for transferring anything that the government wants.
That's right. In other words, if the company is potentially or ostensibly transferring information that may in some way be connected with this very broad definition, they are essentially not liable as a result of the sharing of that information. And this is actually connecting to TPP in a pretty significant way, which is that the internet, the lack of freedom part of TPP also includes many of these immunities for big corporations with regard to data handling.
Correct. And one of the things that's incredibly disturbing, I haven't read TPP yet, but in this particular bill, there's no protections for our privacy at all. So we're giving lots of protections to companies who are transferring the information. But for us in this bill, we're going to allow the Attorney General or the bills that it's being merged with, it's random employees of the Department of Homeland Security will actually write the rules for protecting our privacy. There's nothing in here that actually protects our information at all.
And now that it goes to conference, there's two other bills that CISA may be merged with, and those bills aren't any more pleasing than CISA itself, right?
No, in fact, they're worse, because there's parts in all three of these bills that are currently being merged that allow this information that's transferred to the government to be used against us in court. But the bills that CISA is being merged with that pass the House of Representatives allow this information to be used to prosecute all kinds of things like assault, possession of firearms, all kinds of things it can be used for. So that's one of the things that needs to be figured out in conference committee is exactly what happens with this information when it's transferred to the government. But basically it looks like a blank slate for me or not a blank slate, a blank check for the government to use this information in just about any way they want to prosecute us, to investigate us. It's a bad situation.
And you read these bills in detail all the time, and it's very, very common, and we've talked about it on the show before, but talk to us about how common it is that you see bills that could be decoupled, right? There's no rules that say bills A, B, and C have to be voted on yes or no together. And this is really a tool that is misused by our elected officials all the time. And we would be very well served if we could decouple many of these provisions so that we could pass the good and vote down the bad.
That's true. That does happen a lot. But with this particular situation with the cybersecurity bills, they're trying to create a new system for funneling data from the private sector into the government. And so that's really what I'm reading here is a new system is being created. Unfortunately, lots of parts of this are being left up to the agencies. So political appointees are going to do the actual hard work of creating the rules. But right now, what's being discussed in the conference committee, they have to decide who exactly is going to have the different jobs. That was the main difference between the three bills. But the overall system is very similar in all three. The main point is to give immunity to these private companies for turning over data. And all of the details are what's being worked out.
Well, that's sort of nice in a way, at least. This time it's three bills that in the same way are concerning us, and they're not just completely unrelated bills that are being thrown together. But this hasn't happened yet, right? So you've been looking at what can be done now because this conference committee is working on this as we speak, and people can take action on this.
Absolutely, and I hope people do. Because the most effective thing that you can do to stop this bill is to call and email your representative, because this bill, because it's being merged, has to be voted on again in both the House and the Senate when they have the final version. And so your representatives need to hear from you if this is not something you want to become law, and they need to hear from you now.
And this is also one of those situations where we saw over the last 2 years a number of bills that contain certain provisions that are included in these new three bills that are now being negotiated in conference together. Fortunately, in part because of the huge activism that there was around cybersecurity bills, many of these provisions did not pass in the past, and now they are here again. What can we say about the desires of our legislators or whoever is influencing them to work on these bills, given that we see some very similar provisions come up time and time again over the last couple of years?
I mean, basically, I think it boils down to they're not giving up, and we are. I mean, we assumed that when CISA was defeated in 2012,
right,
that our job was done. But we didn't fire those people. They're still in charge of Congress. And so they keep bringing this stuff back up. And what really concerns me about this one is that all of these bills passed with overwhelming support from both parties in both branches of Congress. So the deck is actually stacked against us unless we get a lot of people to contact Congress right now.
We talk a lot about the differences between Republicans and Democrats. And every once in a while, and this seems to be one of those areas, we actually see broad agreement from the sort of a bulk of Democrats and Republicans, usually leaving you with the more libertarian Republicans and the more progressive elected officials within the Democratic Party sort of uniting against this type of bill. So I think these types of bills, and correct me if I'm wrong, are good examples of, number one, the instances where Democrats and Republicans are by and large not very different. And number two, when that libertarian right and the progressive left come together.
You're absolutely right. That's exactly what's going on here. It has more support in the Republican Party than in the Democratic Party, but it still has a ton of support in the Democratic Party. But you're absolutely right. It's the libertarians and the progressives that are merging together, and they're fighting it as best they can, but they need us to back them up because their numbers are just too small right now. They need other people to join them to defeat this bill.
No question about it. We will continue following it. Jen Briney will continue following it as host of the Congressional Dish podcast, which of course exposes corporate influence in the bills and laws passed by Congress. Jen, thanks as always for joining us.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
You might remember our friend, Pastor Stephen Anderson from the Faithful Word Baptist Church in Tempe, Arizona. He has prayed for the death of President Obama. He has talked about killing gay people. He knows why God did a bad thing and allowed ISIS to attack Paris last week. It wasn't because ISIS is a religious death cult attempting to bring about the apocalypse. It is not because terrorists were influenced by misguided religious teachings or were bad people or whatever. It is all because Paris is open to apparently adultery. It is because of, quote, faggots. It is because of abortion. We have video from Pastor Stephen Anderson. Let's take a look at the first clip.
Says in Proverbs, all they that hate me love death.
That's right.
Speaking of God, those who hate God love death. You know, there's something about when you go to a concert of death metal,
right,
somebody might get killed.
Right.
You know, you're worshiping death. And then all of a sudden people start dying. Oh, wait a minute, what's going on? Well, you love death so much that you bought the ticket?
Yeah.
You love worshiping Satan? Well, let's have some of Satan's religion come in and shoot you. I mean, that's what these people should think about before they go to such a wicked concert. And look, I'm not condoning what these Islamic murderers did. They're wicked. They're murderers.
Oh, yeah.
But you know what? Nobody should be at a concert worshiping Satan with this drug-pushing hillbilly faggot. Yeah. And that's what he is. I mean, all you have to do is just Google this band. Somebody emailed me and said, just hit Google Images, Eagles of Death Metal. And these guys are just total sodomite-looking freaks.
Okay, and then he really gets into the Paris attacks more specifically. Let's take a listen to that portion.
Yeah.
Evil pursueth sinners, Proverbs says, but to the righteous good shall be repaid. Now, let me tell you a little bit about this sinful nation of France.
Please.
Did you know that France is the only country in the world where more than 50% of the population thinks that adultery is fine? Wow. Did you know that? In 2013, the Pew Research Center did a poll of all these different nations all over the world, and only one nation reported back where more than half of the population said that there is nothing immoral about having an affair, as they like to call it. The Bible calls it adultery.
Yeah.
So they just think it's... I'm not saying that half of them have done it. No. I'm saying that more than half of them think it's perfectly fine.
Okay, so does this guy not get that he is the Christian version of ISIS? He would be perfectly comfortable as an ISIS member, except he just has different... he likes Jesus, and ISIS doesn't like Jesus. That's the only difference. These guys are just like ISIS.
This guy drives me crazy. First of all, he's just making so many assumptions. That the Eagles of Death Metal are a Satan-worshipping band. Where does he get that from? That they're pushing drugs? And that everyone who goes, that they worship death? I don't think so. He talks about death all the time. and bans talk about death. Does that mean you worship death?
He then went on to talk about abortion. He went on to talk about homosexuality, basically checking all the boxes for all of the causes that we hear from these right-wing religious freaks about any violent attack that happens. And of course, totally inconsistent, totally incongruous. When it's a tornado in the Midwest where it's anti-gay, it's because of acceptance of homosexuality in New York State. But when it's Sandy, then it's because of what's going on in New Jersey. I mean, it's just cherry picking whatever it is they want. I'm not religious, Lewis, but I hear the devil every time this guy opens his mouth.
This, I think, is probably the worst of the worst. When of all the preachers, whatever you call them, all the religious figures we've covered, I think this guy is by leaps and bounds the worst.
Sarah Palin's daughter, Bristol Palin, was a very handsomely compensated spokesperson for abstinence-only education as a means of preventing sexually transmitted diseases and pregnancy and eventually needing to have an abortion because you got pregnant. And Sarah Palin was interviewed the other day about a bunch of stuff on CBS, but also about Bristol Palin being pregnant again. And Sarah Palin thinks it's all God's work. This is all God's work. She's getting chance after chance to have a baby or not have a baby. I don't know what Sarah Palin's talking about, but a lot of rationalization going on. Let's take a look at the video.
Marriage falling through. Bristol's pregnant again. That can't be how you saw this playing out. Unmarried and pregnant again.
Heck no, because being a single mom is, oh my goodness, my heart goes out to the single parents, but my enormous admiration for what it is that they're able to accomplish doing double duty. And I watch Bristol do double duty all the time, you know, with her little boy Trip. You know, I can't wait for about 45 more days, and I'm going to have a little baby granddaughter, and I'm happy about it.
You're looking at it like a blessing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Of course, there are those who say, come on, this goes against everything you stand for.
Well, the cool thing about putting your faith in God is he certainly is a God of second chances and third and fourth and fifth chances.
Yes.
I screw up all the time.
Yeah, and apparently Bristol Palin is going to need a third or fourth or fifth or sixth chance not to choose to have unprotected sex outside of marriage, which supposedly is the exact activity that her abstinence-only spokespersonship is supposed to prevent. Bristol Palin is proof that what she preaches, that what Sarah Palin preaches, what Bristol Palin is very well paid or was very well paid for doing, does not work. Her daughter was a spokesperson for abstinence-only sex education, and she is pregnant outside of marriage again. And I'm not being critical of the outside of marriage part. I don't think there's any problem if two people want to have a baby outside of marriage. That's not me passing judgment. It's me reminding you of the double standard that Sarah Palin and her ilk passed judgment on that.
This is part of the reason why I don't think Sarah Palin should ever run for office again. You know what? I'm not. I mean, like you said, we're not passing judgment. I mean, this is something people do.
I'm only passing judgment on the hypocrisy.
The daughter's just as bad because she went around preaching all of this stuff too.
That's exactly right.
She's a preacher just like Sarah Palin, and they're both a couple of hypocrites. They're two peas in a pod.
And I am only passing judgment on the utter moral bankruptcy, hypocrisy, and double standards inherent in these so-called pro-family right-wing teachings and the opt-out, the exemptions that exist. Well, yeah, I mean, premarital sex is a sin, and birth control is a sin, and abortion is a sin. But my daughter, who's pregnant again, in spite of her abstinence-only education outside of marriage, this is God giving her opportunities. It is a wonderful thing. It is absolutely disgusting. The moral majority disgusts me, Lewis. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's one idea about how to avoid using the term belief in evolution, which can be a problematic term because evolution is a thing, no matter whether you believe in it or not. Let's take a listen.
Hey, David. I was hoping that you could get some more of the real controversial interviews. They're always fun to watch, especially when they're longer. And I know you got a lot more freedom with the YouTube channel now. You could put some real nice long interviews on there.
So, of course, this is the wrong voicemail.
Really
this is the voicemail from yesterday's show. Do we have the voicemail for today's show, Lewis?
I think we do.
All right, let's take a listen to that one. What the heck?
Hey, David, this is Shane Corbett, big fan of your show. I'm just calling in response to one of your videos I've watched about what is the correct term to address evolution. And when people ask me about it, I usually just say I understand evolution. And that, I understand it to be a fact. You can see it, observe it, and read about it, learn about it. Therefore, I understand it. I don't have to believe in it.
I like that. A bunch of people suggested
Thanks,
that,
buddy.
Lewis, saying, you don't have to use the term belief, because what really matters is, do you understand evolution or do you not understand it? And neither of those require any faith. They merely require knowledge in something that exists. So I like that idea. Send me others if you have them. On today's bonus show, is Ben Carson's ego bigger than Donald Trump's? We will also talk about a rich old white woman who pulls a gun on a black guy. What happened may surprise you. It may not. And we'll talk about simple lasers that can disable autonomous cars. DavidPakman.com/membership. And remember, the 2016 Patriot Mail calendars are here, and they are available at DavidPakman.com/calendar16.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.